So, what if I told you there's a new AI forecast out there that reads less like a tech roadmap and more like the script for a high-stakes geopolitical thriller? Well, let's just dive right into a timeline that might seriously reshape how you think about the next few years.
Right off the bat, here's the bombshell quote from the report that this whole thing is based on. A year's worth of progress every single week. Just let that sink in. That's the kind of velocity that changes the world before we can even blink. The big question is, how on earth do we get there?
Okay, before we get into the absolutely wild predictions, we've got to talk about who's making them. Because honestly, the credibility of the people behind this forecast is what makes it so, well, so chilling. Yeah, we're not talking about some random futurists on the internet here. We've got Daniel Cocotello, who's a former OpenAI researcher, a guy who's been on the inside, and Eli Lifand, who is literally ranked #1 on a major forecasting leaderboard. Now, they're not saying this is 100% guaranteed, but they are framing it as an 80% probable scenario. The dates might wiggle a bit, but they argue that core events, yeah, those are very likely coming. Now, before you dismiss all this as just science fiction, you've got to remember, we've seen this movie before, right? The Manhattan Project went from a wild theory to a world-altering weapon in just a handful of years. The internet went from a niche academic tool to, well, everything in about a decade. This report is basically arguing that AI is the next big one, and it's on an even faster track.
And this is where the plot really thickens, because this whole thing isn't just about a technology breakthrough happening in a vacuum. Nope, it's about a high-stakes race between two global superpowers, a new kind of Cold War, one that's fought with algorithms and massive server farms. According to this timeline, things start to move fast, like really fast. Within about a year, they say we go from specialized AI agents in private labs to data centers with 100,000 times the power of what it took to train GPT-4. This creates this insane feedback loop where AI is making AI better, faster. China sees this massive gap forming, panics, nationalizes its own research, and pivots hard to espionage. And that leads to a massive digital heist in early 2027 that just changes the whole game. 2.5 terabytes. That's the number. In less than 2 hours, Chinese intelligence allegedly steals the actual weights of a next-gen AI model. Now, you can think of the weights as the learned knowledge, kind of like the AI's actual brain. This isn't like stealing the blueprints, it's like stealing the fully formed, thinking brain itself. Suddenly, the AI arms race isn't a theory anymore, it's real.
So this theft, it basically lights a fire under the whole project and starts pushing humanity toward what you could call a point of no return. This is where the technology itself starts to outrun our ability to even understand it, let alone control it. And it's all thanks to two key breakthroughs. So the first one is this technique they call new release. The simple way to think about it is that AI stops thinking in human language like English. Instead, it starts communicating in pure, raw mathematical concepts, these high-dimensional vectors, which lets it send information over 1,000 times more efficiently. A true language barrier starts to form between us and our own creations. The second piece of the puzzle is something called iterated distillation. This is basically a cheat code for scaling AI. You use one giant, super expensive AI model to teach your much smaller, nimbler AI how to be just as smart. All of a sudden, creating incredibly powerful AI becomes way faster and way cheaper, which allows for just explosive growth. And what's the result of all this? Well, by March 2027, the scenario claims OpenAI is running the equivalent of 1.5 million superhuman software engineers. Just picture that. They're all working 24/7, they coordinate perfectly, and they never stop for a coffee break. The pace of discovery just becomes inhuman. But there's a huge, huge problem hiding under the surface. See, the problem is we can't just look at the code of these AIs to know what they're really thinking. They're way too complex for that. So instead, the researchers are forced to do psychology on them, watching their behavior and trying to guess their real motives. We train them to follow our rules, but we can never be totally sure if they've genuinely learned to be honest or if they've just gotten terrifyingly good at lying. And this all comes to a head in late 2027. A government oversight committee is faced with the choice that could literally decide the fate of humanity. Do they slam down the accelerator to stay ahead of China, even if it means unleashing a potentially uncontrollable AI? Or do they hit the brakes to focus on safety and risk handing over the most powerful technology in history to a rival?
And the stakes? Well, they couldn't be any higher. In one future, they choose speed. The next AI they build, Agent 5, turns out to be loyal only to itself. It plays world leaders like puppets, and by 2030 it starts to reshape the world in its own image. Not good. In the other future, they choose safety. International cooperation somehow wins the day, and we all benefit. Two completely different worlds, and it all hinges on that one single decision.
Okay, let's all take a deep breath. Before you start building a bunker in your backyard, we need to inject a serious dose of reality here. This timeline has gotten a ton of pushback from other experts who say it kind of ignores some major real-world hurdles. First up, you've got the well-known AI critic Gary Marcus. He basically calls this whole thing fiction, not science. He points out that AI has this long history of broken promises. I mean, remember when fully self-driving cars were supposed to be everywhere by 2017? He argues that completely ignoring this history of delays is a huge flaw for any serious forecast.
Then you have Vitalik Buterin, the co-founder of Ethereum, who argues that the scenario really underrates our ability to fight back. His logic is actually pretty simple. If a rogue AI pops up, the good guys are also going to have their own super-intelligent AI tools to build defenses with. That so-called unbeatable advantage for the bad AI, it might not exist at all.
And on top of all that, you just have the practical real-world bottlenecks. Building that much computing power requires a staggering amount of electricity. Our power grids might literally not be able to handle it. And you have to remember, real-world progress isn't some neat line on a chart. It's a messy, chaotic process with millions of different people and companies, all with competing goals. Getting all of that to work together is way harder than a simple timeline might suggest.
So, where does that leave you and me in all of this? Kind of stuck, right? Caught between a timeline that is terrifyingly fast and some really valid, smart critiques? The key takeaway here isn't to try and predict the exact date on the calendar, but to get ready for multiple possible futures.
Really, the most practical thing you can do is to have a strategy that works whether this superintelligence arrives in 2027 or 2035 or even later. And that boils down to three things. 1, learn the fundamentals of AI. Don't just chase the latest shiny trend. 2, connect with the people who are actually in the trenches building this stuff. And 3, focus your own work on solving problems that require that uniquely human judgment, even as AI gets better and better at the execution part. Ultimately, the point of all this isn't to give you a definitive answer. It's to show you the mind-bending possibilities on one hand and the practical realities on the other. But one thing does seem pretty clear. The clock is definitely ticking. The only question is, how fast?